everyone, and welcome to the Every Man's Mastermind podcast. This is Baird Shahanian, and today I have the honor of interviewing a former senior instructor for the Napoleon Hill Foundation, Mr. James Spooner. James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Baird. It's great to be here, as a matter of fact. I always enjoy these types of things.
We're so glad to have you, and we really appreciate your time. We know that you're a busy guy, and to spend a little bit of time with us and impart some of that wisdom and knowledge you have that you've gained over the years is going to be invaluable for all of our listeners. So we really appreciate your time. Before we get started with some in-depth conversation about masterminding and success principles, could you tell us a little bit about what your background is? I know you've got a background in the health industry. You had some health clubs for about 20 years. You also have a background in corporate America, and you've done some network marketing as well. But why don't you tell us what your journey was like and how all of those pieces fit together to bring you to where you are today?
So you're going to give me an opportunity to tell my life story.
That's about right. You've got 2 seconds. Here we go.
I condense it into a very short period of time. Well, first of all, let's put a time frame. I'm 70 years old. Okay, so I don't know, what the age of the listeners are to the podcast, but if anything, I probably have made enough mistakes over my life and had enough successes that, if anything, you trade youth for wisdom. So we'll go down that path. A little bit of background and so forth. I've grown up in Pennsylvania, lived in Pittsburgh, went to school and went to college, small liberal arts college in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania called Moravian College, and went on to Lehigh University to get a master's degree years ago in business and economics and so forth. So worked a little bit for a company which was headquartered in Allentown called Mack Truck. And I was fortunate enough to know the right people, which is, I say that my war cry is it's 10% what you know and 90% who you know. But anyhow, that case, it worked out. I was I was the assistant to the senior executive vice president for Mack Truck for a couple of years. I always consider myself to be at that point, a fair-haired boy, since I really didn't know anything about trucks or anything else. But anyhow, it was an interesting time. But what it did do for me, Baird, was that it gave me an opportunity to see the corporate world from the highest end. It's not like you're working your way up from the bottom to the top, and flying the jet. And this is back in the late 60s, early 70s and so forth, and all that kind of thing. But what it did is it convinced me, in my particular case, that I wasn't really a corporate type of a fellow. And the fellow who I was working for left the corporation, and he said, you know what? This trucking thing is probably not for you. I'd suggest that you go on too. So that's when I went in and through a whole series of events, ended up in the athletic club business. And I found an old swim club here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, about 90 miles from where I was. Wasn't even really looking for it. Napoleon Hill, which we're going to talk a good bit about, his catchphrase is whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. And in my particular case, what I was somewhat unhappy, meaning that wasn't, obviously thrilled with going back into the corporate world. So an opportunity presented itself in Harrisburg, never having belonged to a YMCA or any kind of an athletic club or even being an athletic individual. I stood outside of a building back in August of 1973, a very long time ago. Place had been closed down for about 3 years, and I took ownership of that building in my head after about 5 or 6 or 7 hours of standing there just looking at it and deciding whether I want to do it or don't want to do it. And at that point, had enough courage to go over and talk to the people that owned the building. I didn't have a dime. The only thing that I had was a Bentley automobile, which made me look good. Perception becomes everything. So anyhow, talked to these gentlemen. 2 brothers owned the building and had built it for their son, who was one of the principals. Their son had been an Olympic hopeful, so they had a lot of money, and they decided, well, we'll just build a $400,000 or $500,000 building with an Olympic indoor pool in it. And anyhow, the son lost interest in swimming, and I was the recipient of the place after a little bit of time, and in a matter of about 6 weeks and a number of rejections from banks and so forth, I managed to talk these fellas into letting me have an opportunity. And I took it, and the opportunity became a vision, and the vision became a 20-year run, and developed kind of a country club without an athletic club. There's a lot of, different types of clubs around. We were the first ones to ever, and I'm going to tout my home, I had this idea that people that could get well if they were, meaning if they had some kind of a physical problem. So I was the first one to put in a sports medicine clinic into an athletic club environment. And I was the first guy to build racquetball courts on the East Coast that were commercially viable. That would have been where you paid to play. Build 8 racquetball courts and put in a liquor license into it, so we had more of a club atmosphere. A lot of different things that, subsequently have happened to lots of different clubs over the years, but, I always take a lot of pride in having been able to do that somewhat out of necessity to keep the place going, but also kind of a vision as to what I wanted it to really be. The whole reason for telling you this, and we grew it into a $1 million a year plus business, with over 13,000 members and so forth. Family-oriented type of a place, social events ranging in age from young people all the way up to senior citizens and so forth. I was a guy that came up with the old water aerobics programs and so forth. So, all of this may sound like it's a little bit of an ego, but it's not designed to be that, and it really wasn't. It was, number one, out of necessity, and number two, just common sense in applying the techniques of Napoleon Hill, which I had learned back when I was in college, which was, again, the statement was, whatever the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. Given the opportunity, I was given an opportunity, and I figured, well, I'm going to make the most out of it. So I did. So hopefully that's a little bit of background and so forth. I did have a goal, and I'd like to call them promises, but I had grown up with a very, very wise grandmother, and my grandmother lived with us, and she had come from the Victorian era, and grandmother always used to tell me, number one, don't ever settle for second best, which is maybe why I was driving a Bentley when I was 19 years old, an old one, by the way. 1949 was my first car, 1949 Bentley, and the second thing was that you can do, be, and have anything that you want to have. And I had a goal, Baird, one of which was I wanted to, back then it was a lot of money and so forth, but I wanted to have a net worth of $1 million by the time I was 45. And when I got into this athletic club business, I was 27. So I had a spread of a good bit of time to make it happen. And fortunately, by the time that I was 45, I was worth $2.5 million. And that was a good thing. And by the time I was 46, I was worth nothing. So a whole lot of things changed, which they can do in life. So anyhow, that's a background. Napoleon Hill has always been my mentor. He's the best of the best, his philosophy is. And his philosophy is nothing more than an accumulation of a lot of very wise people that went before him. But he condensed it, and I give him a lot of credit.
I want to put a pin into the fact that you say that 45 you were worth $2.5 million, and at 46 you were worth nothing. I'm going to put a pin in that and come back to it in a moment. But I want to first take us back to the moment when you were looking at this swim club and you had no money except an old beat-up Bentley, and you had this vision for yourself. What is it that was different inside your mind that you looked at this and saw something that was going to happen, that you could make happen, that could become who you were, and something you would own and something you could grow, whereas someone else might look at that and say, it'd be nice, but I see all the problems?
Well, number one, I had a motivation. I wasn't even sure what I was doing, to be honest with you. It's one of those occasions when I did get the keys and I walked in and looked at the mice that had been in the swimming pool and all the rest of the crazy things that were in there. I said, oh my goodness, what have I done? Well, what actually ended up happening is that, and we can all experience this, and we do this experience, when I stood outside and I looked at 3 feet of weeds and plywood over the windows and, all of those types of things, there was a certain feeling that came on me where I actually took ownership of it. I made the decision. It all starts, and Napoleon Hill says you have to come up with a decision and make the decision. First an idea, then a decision. And I made the decision, and once I had done that, it became real. Now, on the surface, when you make a decision, it sounds, okay, you make a decision. But the reality of it is that it's on a subconscious and a conscious level. First of all, you make a conscious decision. Subconsciously, you turn it over to that part of whoever we are. I call it, Napoleon Hill calls it infinite intelligence. And that gives you the confidence, to go ahead and do it. So what you're doing is you're taking ownership of something, whatever, and in my particular case, ownership in my mind before I actually took ownership of the facility. And when you do that, and I don't care what it is, whether it's a physical plant like this was or a physical building or just an idea, you own the idea, but it has to be as if it has already happened. And you hear this all through all this personal development program. That's the key thing. And there's a certain energy, there's a certain feeling that comes over you and says, this is mine. And then, the talking points and the negotiations and everything else that I did in order to really make it mine, that was almost secondary. I always ask when I'm teaching a class or, I do a lot of seminars and workshops and things like that. I always ask people, at what point does something become real? Is it, if you're a builder, is it when you've got the building and the people or the client is walking into the building, or was it when somebody came up with the idea to build something? And the answer is that it's when the idea came across and was projected on the screen of the mind. That's when it becomes real. The rest of the stuff is a matter of calling an architect and getting some lines drawn on a piece of paper and, calling a few bricklayers and a couple of other people together, and all of a sudden, 3 months or 6 months or a year later, the thing that you saw in your mind becomes reality. That's the way that it works. And that's the way that life should work. Our biggest problem as individuals is that we have a tendency to be reactionary rather than creative. And by that, I simply mean that, we're given all of the tools to become a very, very creative instrument. That screen of the mind, the ability to become emotionally attached, the ability to visualize something and take ownership, that's all mind stuff. That's all energy, which is all that we really are anyhow, is energy. So, but we have a tendency to react to situations, spend about 90% of ourselves reacting to something that either happens to us that we kind of created or maybe didn't, as opposed to becoming the creative entity. And that's what Napoleon Hill's philosophy was all about. Make the decision, use the auto-suggestion that he talks about, have a mastermind, group of people, do all kinds of different things following through the 13 or the 17 principles, depending upon what you read and so forth, to make something come to fruition. The other part of it, which is very, very important, and probably the most important, is that you have to believe, and your belief level has to be such that you can take ownership even though you haven't taken physical ownership to something, whether it be a materialistic thing or an idea. Hopefully that's a long answer for your very short question, but that's the way it works.
No, and I totally get that, and it's something that when I go places and speak, the first thing I say people have to do is create that sense of belief in themselves, because without that, you're never going to take the next step. It's impossible to take the next step if you don't believe that those steps will be worth it, that those steps will bear the fruits of your labor. So you've got to create this belief. I like to call it like the root system of a tree that nourishes the tree and sustains that tree and holds it up no matter what happens. And that's the type of belief we have to have. But I want to go into this word decide, because I think today many people use that word very frivolously. They say they've decided something, but what they really mean is they're trying it out. They're going to check it out to see if it works, and they'll go as far as they can until they hit some resistance or some difficulty, or they see the rat droppings in the pool, or they see the windows boarded up and then they say, forget it, this isn't worth it, I can't do this, and they give up because they've never really seen that vision for themselves, and they are only going into it to try. And then we have our friends who are enablers, and they pat us on the back and they say, it's okay, as long as you tried, that's all that matters. When in reality, that's the worst thing you can do, is try and not go into something fully and with that that belief and that emotion that says, this is mine, I'm going to achieve it, I'm taking it all the way across the finish line no matter what. What can people do to get out of that mindset? What is that first step? You've talked about the 17 principles of success. What is one of the first or second things that people could do to begin to change their mindset and have the kind of mindset like you had, where they look at something and they say, I get this. This is already mine. I can make this happen. I know that this is mine. I can see what it's going to be. Now I just need to dot the I's and cross the T's.
Well, there's a couple of different things. In relation to Napoleon Hill and his philosophy and so forth, as we said, he starts out with, you have to have a desire. Okay, you have to have a desire to make some kind of a significant change. And there's a lot of layers to understanding that, there's a lot of good information out there. But if you have the desire, that sets it up, and you say, well, where I'm at right now, I'm not satisfied with it. And, how could I change? Not so much how could you change, but what would you want it to look like? I always like to have people put, what if? What if my life looked like this as opposed to what it looks like right now? So the second thing that you're going to do is that you're going to take some kind of action. There's two things that the universe can't handle, and Hill makes a big deal out of this. He says one is inactivity, and the other is some kind of action. So once you've taken and you can visualize, and I'm a great one for vision boards and everything that goes along with it, once you've been able to get a clear picture or a reasonably clear picture of what it is that you're trying to do, the second thing that you're going to do is that you're going to take some kind of action, even if it's the wrong action. Okay? But you've taken ownership of the vision, and then you're going to take some kind of action. And we learn through mistakes. Okay? The person who learns to shoot a basketball, he's going to miss 99% of the time when he first starts throwing the basket throwing the ball at the basket. But then over a period of time, he's eliminated the way that he makes mistakes, and he starts to hit the basket or sink the basket more often than not. So, it's kind of a strange way to say, but it really gets down to having that feeling that I own it and that I deserve it and that I'm willing to give gratitude. We call it universal intelligence, infinite intelligence, whatever. And one of the things that I do, Brad, this is really important, and all of these philosophies do it. The trick on this, and this may sound a little bit like from a religious lesson, and it's not designed to be that. One of the keys on the thing is that, and Hill talks about infinite intelligence, the base core belief has to be that we are a part of something rather than apart from something. When you have that idea, that simply means that, hey, wait a minute, I am a mind with a body, not a body with a mind. And people hear this all the time. But what it really means is that we're working with the power. The Star Wars, which has got a new movie out right now, Star Wars spends most of its time talking about the Force be with you. What's it talking about? Well, there's something out there that makes the trees drop their leaves in another couple of months, or makes them wake up, or, makes plants grow, or whatever it is. There's some kind of an intelligence, and we're of that part, we're of that intelligence, or a part of that intelligence, because we're a part of the universe. We're a part of everything that we see. So you can't be part of something without being the same as, but to a lesser degree. And this is the point that a lot of people miss because they don't think that they're empowered enough to be able to accomplish this. So it's a real simple bridge to build where all they've got to do is to say, well, wait a minute. If I'm a part of the thing that created everything, the stars and the planets and the birds and the bees and everything that goes out there, and all of those things seem to be in a survival and creative mode, then consequently, what do I want my universe to look like? And because you have all the tools on all the internet, you have the ability to reason, you have the ability to think, you have the ability to create and so forth. You know, I'm not going to create a giant universe like the one that I'm a part of, but I'm going to create a universe depending upon where do I want to live? How do I, you know, how healthy do I want to be? What type of friends and people and business acquaintances do I want to have? What's the size of the universe that you want to have? So again, a long answer to a very good question and so forth. It's buying into the idea that you are a part of something rather than apart from something, and consequently you can create anything that you really want to because all of the tools are there.
I love what you said about being a part of this greater intelligence. It's something I guess I never really thought of in those terms, as there's this intelligence that's controlling everything and making all these different things happen, and we are a part of that. I always perceive people as choosing whether or not to be a part of that, but the reality is, whether it's a choice or not, we are a part of that, and why not tap into that resource that we have to be able to create the lifestyle and the life that we want, to be able to touch others and be able to impact other people. And what you were saying reminded me so much of what Dr. Wayne Dyer spoke about in The Secrets of the Power of Intention. He talked about a very similar thing, and just with different terms, but it was the same idea, where there's this greater being, greater than ourselves, that is extending itself through us. And when we recognize that and use that, we can then tap into what we call the universe and receive what the universe has there for us, because it's whatever we want is there for us as long as we want to reach out and take it.
Well, absolutely. You know, I'm a great fan of Wayne Dyer's, and, you know, another statement that I love is that he said, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Well, that's got a quantum physics attachment to it, because depending upon how we're looking at things and what our perception of it is and what our expectancy of it is, it's probably going to change its form. So if all of a sudden we decided that the universe that we're in, meaning the condition that we find ourselves in, the job, the people, the places, and so forth, all we've got to do is to say this is very acceptable, or we have to say this is not acceptable. We change the way that we look at that condition, which simply means that we're going to create a new movie in our mind, a mind map or a mind movie. And consequently, if you believe that to be the case, and that becomes a belief level, then you're going to find that the people, the places, the conditions, the circumstances that are necessary in order to make that come to fruition are going to be presented to you. Ideas, you know, on this month's in this month's Success magazine, which would have been August of 2016, there's in the CD that's presented in there, there's a young lady, and I've forgotten what her name is, who talks about ideas. And she says, consider an idea to be, you know, a particle that kind of floats around in the universe and so forth, floats around in the air, idea, or in the air and so forth. And all of a sudden, you know, it's always looking for the right person to come to, somebody who's receptive to it. Well, Hill talked about we're both a broadcasting and receiving station. So if we're a broadcasting station, we want to broadcast out what it is that we want to have happen, or the conditions that we want to experience in our life. And if we're a receiving station, that means we got to pay attention when they get presented to us. You know, the little signs, you know, in my particular case, going back to the athletic club situation, I was dissatisfied with the condition of being in the truck business. So that's a dissatisfaction. I was, you know, looking for something else. I had no idea what I was really looking for, but I was open to suggestions. You know, one of the great analogies that I love to make is that if you consider your mind, because we've got this mind and nobody really knows whether we've got two minds or one mind, but we consider the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. So however you want to look at it. But if you looked at that subconscious mind as a fertile field, this is an analogy and a picture that people probably heard many times. But if we looked at it as a fertile field, and it could grow absolutely anything. Earl Nightingale used to talk about this. He said, you can grow anything in the field. Do you want to plant something that you want to have in that? Because the subconscious mind is going to take that idea. In my case, I wanted to become a millionaire by the time that I was 45, and I doubled in a half, you know, 2.5 times that and so forth. But I planted the seed, which was nothing more than an idea, and then I took the appropriate actions that were either necessary or appropriate in order to make it happen. If we take the analogy of the seed in the field, and our game plan is to have a field full of corn, then all I have to do is and I'm going to do that in 3 years, all I have to do is plant one seed of corn, and I'm going to take care of that one stalk that comes up, and I'm going to keep all the weeds away. And that one ear of corn's got 500 other seeds on it. I'm going to pay myself first, going to eat 10% of it, take 50 seeds off of that. I'm going to put the rest of them in a bag. I'm going to plant the 450 of those seeds that are remaining in the ground next season. Make sure all the weeds and everything are out of there, fertilize it correctly. What do I have? I have 450 stalks of corn. I do the same thing over again for the third year, and I have a whole acre of corn. I have thousands of ears of corn. That's the law of increasing returns. That's the law of, a law of reciprocity. That's how it works. But it takes time. You know, one of the things I like to point out to people is that when you look up into the heavens, and we live in an instant gratification society. Okay, it's just the way that we're programmed. But you have to kind of take another look at this thing. And you say, well, wait a minute, I look up into the stars and I see light coming. Those stars that you're looking at, they may not even be there anymore because of this thing. The speed of light is 186,000 miles a second. That's pretty quick. But they may have left 100 light years ago. So what I'm looking at is a star that disappeared 100 years ago. It may have blown up or something or other. So we do have to understand that between the time that we plant an idea and the time that all of the pieces come together and the idea fully blooms, become a millionaire, become happy, become whatever you want to become, there is a little bit of a lag time. But you have to look at that and say, hey, you know what? I've got patience. I've got time. Now you can do things that are going to increase the effectiveness and shorten that time up, but you can't think about it today and have it happen tomorrow most of the time. Although I like to do what The Secret talked about, which is go out and, you need a parking place and you're going to be there in 10 minutes. That's pretty quick. You can create a parking place out of thin air. Well, if you can create a parking place out of thin air and do it 99 times out of 100, then you can take it and you can say, well, wait a minute, I can create the environment, I can create the life that I really want to have by simply thinking about it, paying attention, letting those ideas flow in, taking advantage of those ideas and becoming that receptive receiver that Napoleon Hill talks about. And the end result is you get what you want. There's some bumps in the roads, but those bumps in the roads are designed to make sure that you're paying attention and also make sure that you're committed to the end result. Makes sense to me.
I love that idea because, people, you're right. Everything is digital. So, I sent you an email earlier today and you had it within a moment's time. We go to the store to get some food and it's already prepared for us. We don't even need to cook any longer. So people want things immediately, but the reality is they do take time. But what happens, I think, many times with people is they don't see or don't understand the process of how that thing that they desire, that goal that they have in mind is going to get to them. And I love what Les Brown says about that. He says, the how is none of your business. So go out and design the life you want, design those goals that you want, put a plan in place, but how those things come to you is none of your business. Who knows? And that's some of the excitement and the energy behind the whole thing because we never know who we're going to meet. We never know the way that life is going to take us to those goals or bring those goals to us. And it's an exciting thing. If we already knew that, life would be pretty boring. So I love what you're saying, and we just have to keep in mind that it does take time to get to us. And I want to go back to Napoleon Hill now because this is the Everyman's Mastermind podcast, and I want to get into masterminding a little bit. We talk about who Napoleon Hill is, and well, listen, he wrote this book, Think and Grow Rich. That's the book I was referencing at the beginning of the podcast. If you have not read that book, that is the first book you want to read. Whatever book you're reading down right now, put a bookmark in it. Go get Think and Grow Rich and begin reading that because in that book, Napoleon Hill talks about masterminding. And can you tell us a little bit, in the 17 principles of personal achievement, that's the number 2 principle, the Mastermind Alliance. And I think there are a lot of things that come out of a mastermind. We talked about believing who you are and the different things that happen to us and the different things we believe in life by putting better people around us that elevates our game. And that's part of what a mastermind does. But can you tell us, James, why masterminds are so important and why we should make sure we are a part of one and how they can change our lives?
It's an interesting thing. Napoleon Hill's definition of a mastermind, and I think it's the best definition that I've ever heard, because the word mastermind gets kind of tossed around a good bit. But his definition of mastermind is 2 or more like-minded individuals coming together, working in perfect harmony to accomplish some kind of a task. And essentially what ends up happening, and I think most of the listeners have probably experienced this, where they've had an association with somebody and they were trying to accomplish something, and neither one of them had the ability to come up with the ideas that were going to bring whatever it was that they were trying to come up with to fruition. But the interesting part of it was that all of a sudden when they combined the 2 minds, and it can be more than 2 minds, okay? But if there's 2 minds, then all of a sudden they start to come up with ideas that seem to come out of nowhere, where there's a 3rd mind that all of a sudden shows up, or a 4th mind. Neither one of them had the intelligence or the capacity or the knowledge to come up with the ideas that seem to just show up out of the blue. Well, what Napoleon Hill's saying is that the mastermind gives you the ability to connect, or a more empowered ability to connect with this infinite intelligence. And the best way to look at infinite intelligence in this digital world is considered to be the cloud. It's like the cloud, and the cloud seems to know everything. And it holds all the information that you could possibly ever need to have. Well, a mastermind concept, does that. Napoleon Hill, of course, he studied all of the Andrew Carnegie's and the people, for 125 years ago. And probably the simplest way to make the point is that Andrew Carnegie, who was the Bill Gates of today in the steel industry and so forth, back in the turn of the century and so forth, Andrew Carnegie didn't know anything about making steel, selling steel, metallurgy, nothing. But he put himself, and he came up with, interestingly enough, 17 people. Each one of those people was an expert in each of the areas that he needed to have, building a factory, all this kind of stuff. And those 17 people, and his responsibility was number 1, to find those, or to attract those people. I don't like to say find, to attract those people, and to also keep them working in harmony. And by doing that, he became the richest man in the world. There's no difference between he and a Bill Gates or any of these other people, the Warren Buffetts, whatever it is. They surround themselves by people who become part of a mastermind working towards a specific goal, a specific outcome. One of the most important things about a mastermind is that if there is anybody in the group that is in there strictly for their own edification and their own gratification, that person generally has to be asked to leave the group, because they have a selfish motivation. That's not what you're looking for, because they have the ability to become a cancer in that organization. So an organization that has harmony, which is by definition what Hill says it had to be, a harmonious, doesn't mean that they have to, all get along. They can certainly disagree, but the outcome has to be directed at what is the purpose of this organization. And once the purpose becomes a reality, it's very possible that the time for that particular mastermind group is to be dissipated, go away, on to something else. Hopefully that answers your question. Very, very important part of success. So, because generally nobody can do everything themselves. You just can't do it. Plus the fact that you've kind of broken the circuit, if you don't have one, of this thing that connects you to infinite intelligence.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And one of the things that came to mind while you were explaining that was something that I've said to several people, because it was said to me once and it struck such a chord, that, you every once in a while we have those moments where someone says something and we remember it forever. We only ever had to hear it once. And it was said to me once, and I've repeated it to many people since, when you become the smartest person in the room, it's time to get a new room. But many people, I think, are so struck with egocentric feelings that they don't want to be that person who isn't the smartest person in the room. And they surround themselves with people who are below their intelligence level or below their mindset level, and they never get anywhere further in life. And they keep hitting walls. They don't understand why. But the reality is that they're not around the right people. They're not elevating their game. They're not getting around people who are going to make them stretch, make them reach a little bit further. And that's another thing I think that a mastermind group does. It pulls your game up further. It makes you work harder. It creates accountability with each other. And I think that's what you're talking about too. When two or more people get together with like-mindedness and in harmony, that's accountability also, is it not?
Yes, it is. And it creates an atmosphere where the law of attraction kicks in. And there is something called the law of attraction. And, there's a lot of old timers and so forth, one of whom his name was Zig Ziglar. And, he had a definition of success. And he used to say, you can have anything in life that you want as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And your example is that our egos get in our ways, and they lose sight of what in the world they're trying to really accomplish. So, and another definition, by the way, since we're throwing old names out, is, and I mentioned him earlier, is Earl Nightingale's, and he's got an old thing that's on YouTube. Anybody, your listeners can listen to it. It's called The Strangest Secret. But he talks about success, and he says he's asked the question, what is your definition of success? And he says success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal or a worthy idea. And, it makes a lot of sense. The progressive realization, which means that it's ever unfolding. It's coming about. It's creating that universe that you really want to be part of. It's creating the lifestyle, the friends, and all the things that I mentioned previously. It's really fascinating. The biggest thing that people have to learn, in my opinion, and out of the thousands of people that I've lectured to and done workshops for and all that type of thing, is that they really have to understand and get a good grasp on how in the world we're really wired. And that's why it's so important to study this material, this old material, and some of the contemporary. The Wayne Dyers and so forth are the more contemporary. But if you go back and you look at Napoleon Hill and Charles Haanel with his master key system, and Earl Nightingale from the early 50s, and Thomas Troward, and all these guys and so forth, and it's so easy to get this information. Once you understand that, you become that creative force as opposed to that reactionary force. And once you become a creative force, then, the sky's the limit. So hopefully that's answers some questions for you.
Yeah, James, and that progressive realization of an idea, it struck me that's the reason most people, when they go on a diet, they set a goal, and the goal might be to, lose 20 pounds. And they lose 20 pounds, and they call that success. And the reality is, a year later, they've gained those 20 pounds back. And the reason is because they saw it as a landing place. They didn't see it as a progressive realization of an idea. So lose 20 pounds, and then what? There's got to be that thing afterwards, and that's why they lost. That's why they went back to where they were. That's why they rebounded, because they didn't see it as a progressive realization of an idea. They saw it as a landing place, and that's probably why many people fail, I would imagine.
Well, that's exactly. I'll give you a $2.5 million example of it, and to make a final point here and so forth. I mentioned to you that my goal was to be worth $1 million by the time that I was 45, and when we added up all the numbers, I was worth $2.5 million, and by the time I was 46, I was worth nothing. It all went away through a whole series of interesting events, which I guess I can take responsibility for. But the point that you've just made is really the important point, and that is I didn't ever plant the seed and say, well, what about after 45? So the universe provided the solution. I should have said by the time I'm going to be 45, I'll be worth $1 million. And by the time I'm 46, I'm going to be worth $5 million. In other words, there needed to be a progressive achievement or a progressive desire to that. And since I created a vacuum and didn't fill it with anything, the universe provided a set of circumstances which was known as the savings and loan crisis back in the late 80s and the early 90s and so forth, which was like our 2008 situation. And the end result was that it all went away. But you see what ended up happening is that I didn't see anything beyond 45. And I planted that seed when I was 21. What's going on here? It just lets you know the power of what you say. You talk about a goal, and I'm going to end up with this because I know our time is pretty short here. I like to take the word, we all talk about goals, and I've talked about goals for years. The reality of it is that about 95% of the things that we specifically identify as something that we want to accomplish and we consider to be a goal, like a New Year's resolution or something, we don't accomplish. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Okay, so consequently, what we've set up is we have set up a pattern of thinking or a pattern of conditions that actually did not happen. And our subconscious mind looks at that. Remember, it can't take anything. It only takes instructions from its conscious mind. The conscious mind says, well, I guess I didn't accomplish that. Okay, so now what happens is that the belief system and the belief of the subconscious mind, consider it to have a personality, looks at it and says, well, this guy never, this guy or this person, this girl never she never really accomplishes anything. She never fulfills a goal. So one of the very simplest, what I call tricks of the trade, is we want to take the word goal and we want to discard it. Throw it in the waste paper basket forever. And we're going to give you another scenario. When you make a promise, who do you make a promise to? Yourself, or do you make it to somebody else most of the time?
To yourself.
No, you make a promise to somebody else. I promise that I'll show up. No, I promise I'll clean out your garage. So now what the deal is that, and you always do that. 95% of the time you go ahead and you keep your promises. And 95% of the time they're always to somebody else. You keep an appointment. You do this, you do that. Well, one of the tricks that the listeners should listen to on this thing, take the word promise, because now what happens is the subconscious mind, which is the mechanism that we're talking about that buys into a belief level, it says, hey, this guy keeps all the promises all the time. So I think I'm going to make promises. So rather than using my goal is to be a millionaire by the time I'm 45, it's I promise myself that I'm going to be that I'm going to do that. I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to have a happy marriage, or I'm going to find my perfect pet, or whatever it might be. Start thinking in the word of promises, because you're already programmed. You're already wired to keep a promise. We just don't keep promises to ourselves. So why not move it from over here where we keep it for somebody all the time for somebody else, and move it over to us? And now you have, in an instant, have rewired yourself in your condition. So now you run around saying, hey, you know what? I'm promising myself that. And then you fill in the blank. It works every time.
Wow, the power of words. That's amazing.
The power of words, because the power of words are powerful. What else can I say? They work. That should be the price of the admission to anybody who's listening to this right here. That's a trick that works all the time. And I call it a trick, but it's a real trick.
Wow. So what promise are you going to make to yourself today, right now in this moment? What promise are you going to keep? What promise are you going to make sure that you don't break over the next week, month, year, several years down the road, to create that progressive realization of whatever idea it is that you have in your mind that you want to achieve, that you want to continue to work towards for the rest of your life? Our guest today was James Spooner. James, thank you so much. The wisdom you have shared with me and with our listeners is absolutely invaluable. So many things. I've read a lot of books, but there are so many things. I have 3 pages of notes from our conversation. So many things I'd never heard put quite the way that you put them today. And it completely changed my perception of a lot of different ideas that I had in my mind. So thank you so much. Is there anything you want to Last words to say, a book you want people to read, a way you want people to contact you before we close out.
Well, Think and Go Rich is a book that they should read, and they can pick it up in any of the bookstores. And yeah, I can be reached at, if you want to let me do a little commercial here, at Bentley Club, Bentley Club, one word, at AOL. I'm an old guy, so I still use AOL. And my telephone number, of course, is 717-370-1829. And I'm always open to help somebody and answer a question if they want to give me a call.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And this has been the Everyman's Mastermind podcast. This is our first podcast. If you would like some information about Everyman's Mastermind, you can simply go to everymansmastermind.com, or you can also look us up on Facebook. Just look up Everyman's Mastermind. James, thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's listening. And we will see you again on our next podcast for Everyman's Mastermind. Thanks, everyone. Have a greater day.